My parents didn't come to my son's funeral. 3 weeks later, they sat across from me at the same kitchen table where we once folded his baby clothes and asked for his money. Not help, not a loan. They wanted the $860,000 trust fund set aside for my dead child, so my sister could buy her dream home. We were sitting at that same kitchen table, the one where I had once helped my mother fold tiny blue onesies, the one where my father used to slide my son a cookie when he thought I wasn't looking. Now there was no child's chair, just 3 mugs of coffee going cold, and an envelope my mother kept tapping with her fingernail. "We need to talk about the trust," she said. I remember blinking. Once, maybe twice, like my brain needed time to catch up. The word didn't belong in that room. Not with the silence still clinging to the walls. Not with my son's picture still on the fridge, because I hadn't found the strength to take it down. "What trust?" I asked, even though I already knew. My father cleared his throat. He hadn't looked at me since I arrived. He stared at the tabletop, like it might explain this for him. "Your sister has found a house," he said. "A good one. Prices are only going up. This is the right time." I waited for the rest of the sentence, for the part where he admitted what he was really asking. It never came. My mother slid the envelope toward me. "There's $860,000 sitting there," she said, "untouched. Your son doesn't need it anymore." That was when the room went quiet in a way I had never known before. Not the heavy quiet of grief, not the stunned quiet of a hospital hallway. This was different. This was the sound of something inside me breaking cleanly in half. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "You skipped his funeral," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone braver than me. "You didn't come. You didn't call. And now you're here talking about his money?" My mother winced, as if I'd been rude instead of honest. "That's not fair," she said. "We couldn't handle it emotionally." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It came out sharp and ugly. "You couldn't handle burying your grandson," I said, "but you can handle asking for his trust fund?" My father finally looked up. His eyes were tired, annoyed more than sad. "There's no need to be dramatic." That word, dramatic, hit harder than anything else. I thought of the cemetery, the small white casket, the wind cutting through my coat while I stood there alone, because my parents were not in a place to attend. I thought of my sister. Of course I did. Emily had texted me the morning of the funeral. "Mom and Dad are staying with me today. I'm really struggling." No mention of her nephew. No mention of me. I sat back down slowly, afraid my legs wouldn't hold. "So you're asking me to take money set aside for my dead child," I said carefully, "and give it to my sister so she can buy a house." My mother nodded, relieved now that it was out in the open. "It's what makes sense," she said. "Family money should stay in the family." I stared at her. He was family. She looked away. That was when I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't grief making people say stupid things. This was a decision, planned, discussed, rehearsed. They had waited just long enough for it to sound reasonable. "You didn't even come to say goodbye," I said quietly. My father sighed like this conversation was tiring him. "We said we were sorry." "No." They said they were sad. "There's a difference." I stood again, steadier this time. "That money is not yours," I said. "And it is not Emily's." My mother's face hardened. "Don't do this," she warned. "Your sister needs help." I thought of the empty bedroom at home, of toys still unopened, of the trust I had promised myself I would protect, because it was the last thing my son had left in this world with his name on it. "You didn't show up for my son," I said. "You don't get to benefit from him now." My father pushed his chair back. "You're being selfish." I nodded. "Then this is the first time." No one spoke after that. When I left, the envelope was still on the table. I didn't take it. I didn't need to. Because what they didn't realize was that this wasn't an emotional conversation. It was a legal one, and they had no idea how badly they had miscalculated. The day of my son's funeral is burned into me in fragments, like a film that skips at the worst moments. The church smelled like old wood and lilies. Someone I barely knew pressed a tissue into my hand and whispered that she was sorry for my loss, her voice breaking before mine ever did. I nodded at people whose faces I couldn't remember afterward. I kept waiting for my parents to walk in late, breathless and apologizing. They never did. The front pew on the left was empty. That was theirs. Everyone knew it. When the service started, I felt the weight of that absence more than the coffin in front of me. Not because I needed them to hold me, I'd already learned how to stand alone, but because their absence made something unmistakably clear. Even in the worst moment of my life, I still wasn't the priority. After the burial, my phone buzzed once. A message from my mother. "We love you. We just couldn't do it today." No offer to come later. No plan to sit with me. Just distance, wrapped in sympathy. Emily posted a photo on social media that evening. She and my parents, sitting on her couch, glasses of wine on the table. The caption read, "Family first." I stared at it until my hands went numb, then turned my phone face down and didn't pick it up again that night. This wasn't new. It just hurt more now, because the stakes were higher. Growing up, Emily was always the one they worried about. The fragile one. The one whose feelings mattered most. If she failed a class, it was because the teacher didn't understand her. If I failed, it was because I hadn't tried hard enough. When Emily dropped out of college, my parents paid off her loans and let her move back home. When I took a second job to pay my way through school, my mother told me I was making things harder than they needed to be. Emily got rescued. I got resilience. When I married young and moved across the state, my parents told everyone I was independent. It sounded like praise. It was actually permission to forget about me. When my son was born, they were excited. At first. They bought toys, took pictures, bragged to their friends. But when things got hard, when hospital visits became frequent, when the prognosis stopped being hopeful, their presence faded. Emily needed them. Emily was stressed. Emily couldn't handle seeing him like that, so they stayed away. I never asked them to choose. They did it on their own. The trust fund was set up after the settlement came through. A combination of insurance, compensation, and money from my husband's side of the family. It was meant to secure my son's future, college, care, whatever he might need if he survived. When he died, I became the sole trustee. The money didn't magically become unassigned. It didn't turn into communal property. It still had a name on it. His name. But my parents didn't see it that way. To them, the trust wasn't a memorial. It was unused resources. Emily had always wanted a house, not just any house, a forever home. Something open concept, with a big kitchen and a yard she could post photos of. She had found one, apparently. Too expensive, too soon, but perfect. And suddenly, my son's trust became the solution. I found out later they had already talked to a mortgage broker. They had already decided, without me, that I would say yes. That night, after leaving their house, I drove around for hours. I didn't want to go home to the quiet. I didn't want to sit with the truth yet. Eventually, I parked by a darkened park and cried until my chest hurt. Not just for my son, for myself. For every time I had been told to be understanding, to be flexible, to not make things harder for the family, I realized then that grief hadn't made them cruel. It had just removed the need for them to pretend they weren't. The next morning, my phone rang. "Emily, I hear you were upset," she said, like this was a scheduling issue. "Mom says you overreacted." I didn't respond right away. "I mean," she continued, "it's not like the money has a purpose anymore." That sentence ended something inside me. "It does," I said, "just not one you benefit from." She scoffed. "Wow, so you're punishing me?" "No," I replied. "I'm protecting my son." She went quiet. Then her voice hardened. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe, But for the first time since my son died, I felt something other than loss. I felt clarity. And clarity, I was learning, scared them more than grief ever had. 2 days later, my father left a voicemail. He didn't say my name. He said, "We need to resolve this before it gets ugly." That was the moment I understood exactly how they saw the situation. Not as a family fracture, not as a moral line crossed, but as a dispute over assets. Something to be negotiated, pressured, corrected. I didn't call him back. Instead, I called the attorney who had helped set up the trust in the first place. His voice was calm, professional, completely untouched by the panic in mine as I explained everything in clipped sentences. "You're the sole trustee," he said when I finished. "Your parents have no legal standing. None." I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel. "They're talking about court." He paused. "People threaten court when they don't like the answer," he said. "That doesn't mean they have a case." For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders drop. Just an inch. That afternoon, my mother showed up at my house without calling. I watched her through the window as she stood on the porch, adjusting her coat, rehearsing her concern. I almost didn't open the door. When I did, she stepped inside like she still belonged there. Her eyes went immediately to the hallway, toward my son's bedroom. She didn't acknowledge the closed door. "We didn't raise you to be like this," she said, skipping pleasantries. "To protect my child?" I asked. She shook her head. "To be unforgiving." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You skipped his funeral." She flinched. "We've talked about that." "No," I said. "You explained it. You never took responsibility for it." She crossed her arms. "This money could change your sister's life." "It was meant to protect my son's," I replied. "He's gone," she said, sharper now, her patience thinning. "You're the one keeping everyone stuck." There it was, the accusation I'd been waiting for. "You're confusing grief with entitlement," I said. "They're not the same thing." Her mouth tightened. "So you'd rather let it sit there? Wasted?" The word hit me like a slap. "Nothing about that money is wasted," I said slowly. "It represents a future that was stolen." She scoffed. "That's dramatic." I almost laughed again. Instead, I walked to the door and held it open. "I think you should go," I said. She stared at me, stunned. "You're choosing this over your family?" "No," I said. "You already chose." After she left, I sank onto the couch and stared at the wall. My hands were shaking, but my thoughts were steady. I knew then this wasn't going to end with one conversation. They weren't going to back down because I asked them to be kind. They were going to escalate. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was from a lawyer, or someone claiming to be one. "We represent your parents regarding a dispute over the trust assets. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." I forwarded it to my attorney without responding. His reply came 10 minutes later. "They're bluffing, and if they aren't, they'll lose." Still, seeing it in writing made my stomach twist. This was no longer just about emotional boundaries. They were willing to turn my son's death into a legal strategy. Emily sent a text that night. "I can't believe you're doing this. After everything Mom and Dad have done for you." I typed back once. "They didn't show up for my son." She didn't reply. Over the next week, the pressure came from all sides. An aunt called, voice thick with concern, asking if we could talk this through like adults. A cousin suggested mediation, reminding me that money tears families apart. No one asked how I was sleeping. No one asked how it felt to walk past my son's empty room every morning. They only asked about the money. That's when I stopped doubting myself. Because if this were really about healing, about family, about love, the first conversation would have been different. It would have started with grief, with accountability, with presence. Instead, it started with a demand, and I wasn't going to reward that. What my parents didn't realize, what Emily still didn't understand, was that once you force someone to defend their dead child, you lose access to them. Not emotionally, not financially, not ever. The formal letter arrived the following Monday, printed on heavy paper with a letterhead designed to intimidate. I recognized the law firm's name immediately. Old, local, expensive. The kind my parents liked because it sounded impressive when repeated at dinner parties. I read it once, then again. It accused me of withholding family assets and acting against the best interests of surviving relatives. It suggested that my emotional state might be impairing my judgment as trustee. That part made my hands shake, not because it scared me, but because of how calculated it was. They weren't just trying to get the money, they were trying to discredit me, to reframe my grief as instability, to turn my son's death into a legal weakness. I called my attorney. He listened without interrupting, then sighed. "They're pushing," he said. "That usually means they're frustrated." "They're implying I'm unfit," I said. "Yes," he replied calmly, "and they'll fail. But it tells us something important." "What?" "They're willing to go very far." That night I slept badly. Not from fear, but from memory. I kept seeing my son's hospital room, the quiet beeping of machines, the way his hand felt in mine at the end, lighter than it should have been. I thought about how my parents hadn't seen that, hadn't held him, hadn't stayed. And now they were willing to stand in front of a judge and claim they knew what was best for him. The next morning, my attorney sent a response on my behalf. Clear, direct, final. The trust was irrevocable. I was the sole trustee. Any further contact would be considered harassment. Within hours, my phone rang. My father. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short, controlled, angry beneath the restraint. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. "Your mother is devastated." That word again, devastated. Not when her grandson died. Now, when access was denied. Emily called next. This time, she didn't pretend to be calm. "You think you're better than us now?" she snapped. "Hiding behind lawyers?" I closed my eyes. "You tried to take money from my dead child." She laughed bitterly. "It's not his anymore." That was it. "You don't get to decide when someone stops mattering," I said, "and you don't get rewarded for not showing up." She went silent. Then quietly, "Mom says you've changed." "Yes," I said. "That's the point." The calls slowed after that. Not because they understood, but because they were recalculating. A week later, my attorney called with an update. "They've requested mediation." I almost smiled. Mediation meant compromise, and compromise meant they finally understood they couldn't force me. "No," I said, "we're not mediating." He paused. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "There's nothing to negotiate." Because that was the truth. This wasn't a disagreement over interpretation. This was a line. And lines only matter when you refuse to move them. 2 weeks later, the legal threats stopped. Not with an apology, not with understanding. Just silence, the kind that follows lost leverage. My mother sent one last message. "I hope one day you'll forgive us." I stared at it for a long time before replying. Forgiveness requires accountability. This never did. After that, nothing. No more lawyers, no more demands, no more performances. One evening, I took the trust documents out of my safe and read them carefully, cover to cover. Not because I needed reassurance, but because I needed to remember what they stood for. Protection, intention, love, expressed in structure when words weren't enough. I updated the trust's terms within my legal authority, created a foundation in my son's name, allocated funds to pediatric care and grief support for families who had no one show up for them. It felt right. It felt like choosing action over endurance. The night I signed the final paperwork, I cried, not from sadness, but from relief. The kind that comes when you stop carrying other people's expectations alongside your own grief. My parents never asked about the foundation. They never asked how I was doing. They only stopped asking for the money, and that told me everything I needed to know. Time didn't heal anything. It clarified it. Weeks passed without a word from my parents. No calls, no messages sent by accident. No cousins checking in on their behalf. At first, the quiet felt suspicious, like the calm after a storm that hadn't finished breaking things yet. I kept waiting for another letter, another threat, another attempt to reframe the story in their favor. Nothing came. And slowly, I realized something unsettling. Without the conflict, there was very little left. Grief still woke me at odd hours. I still reached for my phone sometimes, half asleep, thinking I should check on my son. That reflex didn't disappear just because the world kept moving. But the constant pressure, the expectation that I would explain myself, justify my choices, make room for other people's comfort, was gone. It was replaced by something quieter, space. Emily was the first to break the silence. She didn't call. She sent an email. Long, carefully worded, polished, full of phrases like miscommunication, stress, and how hard this has been on everyone. She never mentioned the funeral. She never mentioned the trust. She never mentioned what she had asked me to do. Instead, she wrote about how lonely she felt, how the house she'd wanted had slipped away, how Mom cried all the time now, how Dad barely spoke anymore. At the end, she wrote, "I hope you can find it in your heart to stop punishing us." I read it twice. Then I closed it. I didn't reply. Because this wasn't punishment. Punishment would have required intent to hurt. This was a boundary, and boundaries don't need explanations for people who only respect access. A month later, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She hugged me too tightly and said, "Your mother is just heartbroken." I nodded. I had learned how to do that without agreeing. "She says you've shut them out," the woman continued gently. I stepped back. I said, "There's a difference." She looked confused, like that distinction had never occurred to her. That night, I went into my son's room for the first time in weeks. The door still stuck slightly when I pushed it open. The air smelled faintly like baby lotion. I sat on the floor and let myself feel everything I'd been holding at a distance. I cried for him. And then, for the first time, I cried for the version of myself who had always tried to earn love by being reasonable, by being quiet, by being the one who understood. That version of me would have given them the money. She would have told herself it was the right thing, that it would keep the family together, that her son wouldn't need it anyway. I understood then how close I had come to disappearing inside that logic. The foundation launched quietly. No press, no announcements, just paperwork and intention. The first grant went to a children's hospital 2 states away. The director sent a handwritten thank you note. She mentioned my son by name. I held that letter longer than I expected to. My parents found out eventually. Not from me, from someone else. They didn't comment publicly, but my aunt called to ask why I would do something like that instead of helping family. "I did help family," I said. "Just not the one you're thinking of." That was the last time she called. Holidays came and went. Invitations stopped arriving. At first, that hurt more than I admitted. Then it didn't. I created new rituals, volunteered, traveled, learned how to sit with myself without waiting for approval. One afternoon, nearly a year after the funeral, I received a message from my father. Just one sentence. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm at peace." It was the most honest thing I'd said in months. Peace didn't mean the pain was gone. It meant I was no longer allowing it to be used against me. They never apologized. Not really. They never acknowledged the funeral, or the demand, or the cruelty of asking for money meant to protect a child who never got the chance to grow up. But they stopped asking, and that was the proof. Because if they had truly cared about me, or my son, the first thing they would have shown up for was the loss. Instead, they showed up for the money, and once you see that clearly, there's no unseeing it. By the second year, the story my family told about me had settled into something neat and manageable. I was distant, hardened, different since everything happened. Those words traveled through relatives and old friends until they reached me, stripped of context and responsibility. No one ever said why. That was fine. I had stopped correcting people. What surprised me was how little space my parents now occupied in my daily life. I had expected anger to linger, or bitterness to harden into something permanent. Instead, there was mostly absence, not an ache, a neutrality. Like a room you no longer enter because you've already rebuilt the house around it. Emily tried once more, late one evening, with a call I almost didn't answer. Her voice was softer than before, cautious, like someone testing thin ice. "Mom's not doing well," she said. I waited. "She cries a lot," Emily added. "She feels like she lost both her grandson and her daughter." There it was again. The revision. The attempt to recenter the pain where it felt safest. "I lost my son," I said. "Everything else came after." Emily sighed. "You don't have to be so cold." I looked out the window at the street below, people walking their dogs, living their lives without knowing anything about mine. "I'm not cold," I said. "I'm just not available." She didn't respond. Later that night, I thought about how often women in my family were praised for endurance, how pain, quietly carried, was treated like virtue. I had been good at that once. Too good. The foundation grew steadily. Other parents reached out. Some shared stories I couldn't read all the way through in one sitting. Some just said thank you. I learned how to hold grief without letting it consume me. I learned that purpose didn't erase loss, but it gave it somewhere to go. My parents never acknowledged the foundation directly. They referred to it once, obliquely, as that project. My mother told a neighbor she was proud of me, but never said it to my face. I stopped waiting for her to. One afternoon, I ran into my father at a pharmacy near his house. We hadn't seen each other in nearly a year. He looked smaller, older. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "How are you?" he asked finally. "I'm okay," I said, and I meant it. He nodded, as if storing that information somewhere he might need later. "Your mother misses you." I considered that. "She knows where I am." He didn't argue. As I turned to leave, he said, "We never meant to hurt you." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "Intent doesn't undo impact," I said, "especially when it keeps happening." There was no reply. Walking back to my car, I felt something settle. Not closure, but acceptance. The understanding that some people are only capable of loving you when it costs them nothing. The trust remained untouched except for the distributions I authorized. Every transaction documented, every decision deliberate. There was something grounding about that clarity. No emotional bargaining, no reinterpretation. Paper didn't flinch. It didn't rewrite itself to ease discomfort. It simply recorded the truth. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if my parents ever replayed that first conversation. If they ever heard their own voices saying my son didn't need the money anymore. If it haunted them the way the empty spaces haunted me. But I no longer needed to know. Grief had changed me, yes, but not in the way they implied. It hadn't made me irrational, or bitter, or cruel. It had reduced me to what mattered. And what mattered was this. My son's life, even though it was short, had meaning. His name deserved to be spoken with respect. His legacy was not a bargaining chip. My parents could live with their version of events. I would live with mine, and mine didn't require their approval. The third year came without warning. No milestone, no anniversary demanding attention. Just an ordinary morning when I realized I hadn't thought about my parents in days. That was how I knew something had finally shifted. Grief still lived with me, but it had changed shape. It no longer surged without notice. It settled in predictable places. Birthdays that never came, school years that would never start. I learned how to make room for it without letting it speak for me. The foundation reached its first major benchmark that spring. We funded a long-term care wing at a children's hospital and established a small emergency fund for parents forced to choose between staying with their child and paying rent. I attended the opening quietly, standing at the back of the room while a nurse spoke about families who no longer felt alone. She said my son's name once. Just once. It was enough. Afterward, someone asked if my parents were proud. I smiled politely and said, "This isn't about them." And it wasn't. That summer, I received a final letter from my mother. Shorter than the others. Less defensive. She wrote about gardening, about how quiet the house felt now, about missing things she hadn't noticed before. At the end, she wrote, "I wish we had done better." I read that line several times. She didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't say we were wrong. She didn't say my son's name. But for the first time, she didn't ask for anything. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because some acknowledgments arrived too late to require a reply. They exist to be seen, not answered. A few months later, Emily moved again. Smaller place, farther away. I heard through a cousin that she was starting over. I hoped she was. I hoped she'd learn how to stand without leaning on other people's sacrifices. I didn't reach out. My life continued, steadily. I traveled. I made friends who knew nothing about my family and didn't need to. I built routines that belonged to me. On my son's birthday, I took the day off work and went to the ocean. I said his name out loud to the wind. No one took that from me. Looking back, I understand now why my parents asked for the money when they did. It wasn't just greed. It was fear. Fear of confronting what they had avoided. Fear that if they acknowledged my son fully, his death, their absence, their choices, they would have to sit with a kind of guilt they had spent their lives outrunning. The trust wasn't just money. It was evidence. Evidence that my son existed, that he mattered, that his life had weight, even if it was brief. They wanted to turn it into a house, a distraction, something solid they could point to and say, "Look, something good came of this." But something good already had. It just didn't benefit them. I don't tell this story often. When I do, people usually expect a dramatic ending. A courtroom scene, a tearful reunion, a final confrontation that ties everything neatly together. There wasn't one. What there was instead was distance, boundaries, a quiet refusal to let my worst loss be used as leverage. My parents didn't lose me because of money. They lost me because when my son died, they chose comfort over presence and entitlement over compassion. They skipped his funeral. Then they demanded his trust. And in doing so, they revealed exactly how they valued him. And me. I didn't scream. I didn't retaliate. I didn't collapse the family. I simply said no. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending there is. Because love that requires erasing your grief isn't love. It's access. And access, once revoked, doesn't return just because someone finally understands what it costs them. My son left this world quietly, but what I protected in his name will outlast every excuse they ever made. That's the truth. And I will carry it, calmly, clearly, and without regret, for the rest of my life.